In just a moment, we're going to bring on maybe the leading journalist and commentator on one of the topics today. My case is there were two things that came out of this election, two stories, two big arguments, two things worth talking about, two things we've been talking about today. Democrats, including who their speaker is going to be, if it's going to be Nancy Pelosi, as assumed, and democracy. Something that goes beyond the personality, something that goes beyond who will sit in power, but what would be the mechanisms by which power is garnered. Maybe the leading writer, journalist, commentator, or just commenter, maybe both, on this topic is Ari Berman. It's always an honor to talk to him. If you don't follow him on Twitter, you should. Keeps you informed of what's going on. He joins us right now. Ari, how's it shaking?
Hey, thanks for having me. Interesting times.
All right. Where do you want to start? You want to start Florida? You want to start Stacey Abrams? You want to start any pro-democracy stuff that's happened in the country? What's on your mind?
Let's start with Florida and
Great.
Georgia, and then I think we can talk about the good stuff that's happening. But I mean, I think basically the broader story in both of these states is that Republicans don't want to count every vote and have in fact put in place a number of restrictive policies, particularly in Georgia, to keep every vote from counting. I mean, so in Georgia, you had the Secretary of State, Brian Kemp, who was also running for governor and put in place.
Just say it we now just say, oh, well, yeah,
we just say it, I know.
So the dude count it's like, well, in this boxing match, the referee is the guy in the red trunks. Hey, wait a minute. That guy's supposed to be wearing stripes, not supposed to be wearing the red trunks.
I know. Some of this stuff has been so ingrained that you even have to step back and talk about the ridiculous of it. And, of course, if this was pretty much any other industrialized democracy, the person running would not be able to oversee.
Or any comic book or any novel or any conversation over tea.
Yeah, exactly. So, but that was the case in Georgia, and you had a situation where Brian Kemp put in so many different restrictive policies, from purging 1.5 million people to putting 53,000 voters on this exact match pending registration list, to having absentee ballots rejected, to there being 4.5-hour lines in Atlanta, and now you're talking about an election that's decided by just a few thousand votes. I mean, it's about 17,000 votes away from going to a runoff. Kemp is only up by 55,000 votes, and you just add up all of his policies, and you just wonder what impact this had on the election. And then in Florida, I mean,
well, let's pause there for a second, because one of your tweets, and I'm looking at it right now. Brian Kemp currently leads Stacey Abrams by 55,000 votes. That's roughly equal to the 53,000 votes he put on pending registration list weeks before the election. 80% of them people of color.
Yeah, and again, so it was confusing because if you were on the pending registration list, you could theoretically show up and vote if you had the right ID at the polls. However, I don't know, and I'm trying to figure this out now. I would imagine that if you or I got a letter saying that there was a problem with our registration, we would probably think, if we didn't read the fine print, that we were ineligible to vote. So we don't know how many of those 53,000, even if they were eligible to vote, actually tried to vote, and then how many of them, even if they still actually ended up voting, how many cast ballots that will end up being counted. So that was just one data point, but there was a tremendous amount of confusion in Georgia over that exact match requirement, and people were being put on the exact match requirement, remember, because they had a missing hyphen, a missing apostrophe, from very, very minor stuff missing from their voter registration information to the state databases that the state should have been able to confirm through other sources. And so this whole thing was just really nuts from the beginning. And in Florida, you're seeing a lot of the same issions play out.
Well, here, so pause for a second before we get to Florida. I want to ask this question. So my old argument, and I don't know if I don't say this much anymore, but I said you can only really steal a close election. I don't want to have that argument. But when we think about, Palm Beach County, the year 2000, when we think about Green Party voters in Wisconsin in 2016, very often there's a pretty easy mathematic or arithmetical case to make that, but for this, blank might have happened. Right.
Yeah.
In a state like Georgia, is it your current, and I know you probably need to do some more math and do some more investigation, but is it your case that the the combined weight of voter confusion, of duplicate signature rules, of the various ways of long lines because of closing down polling places in Georgia, is it pretty obvious that that's worth more than 55,000 votes, or is this just us? It's just a chance to highlight the importance of access to democracy.
Well, so I don't know. I mean, I'm looking into this right now. I would say almost certainly it cost enough votes or create enough confusion to cause the race from not going to a runoff, if indeed it doesn't go into a runoff. Because, I mean, then you're talking about 17,000 votes potentially keeping Stacey Abrams from getting to a runoff. And I think if you add up all the different voting restrictions and then the suppressive effect that it had on people just not even turning out in the first place because they didn't believe their votes were counted. I mean, I think you absolutely could say that Kemp kept the race from going to a runoff, and then who knows what would have happened there. But I mean, I think the bigger picture is, why did they make it so difficult to vote in the first place? And I think regardless of whether it swings an election, voter suppression is wrong. But I think when an election is close, you can really drill down and see the impact of these kind of changes, and you can say like, wow, 53,000 people in a vacuum might not sound a lot, but when the election is being decided by 50,000 votes or less, then you start to say, wow, this stuff really has an impact, and you can start to see why Republicans are so determined to try to do it.
Let's switch to Florida, as you wanted to do. Recount finished this morning. What do we know? What's happening?
I don't know. Nothing's finished as far as I know.
Okay.
They're still counting ballots. And I mean, the Republicans are still trying to get them to stop counting ballots. The state is still counting ballots. There have been extensions because, for example, 5,000 ballots have been thrown out for mismatched signatures, the same kind of thing that's been happening in Georgia. It looks like almost all of these were legitimate votes where for some reason or another the signatures didn't match, which is a very common and I think an increasing problem right now. As more people vote by mail, more people are having their ballots thrown out. That is one of my concerns. I'm interested in your perspective on this, coming from a vote by mail state. This is one of my concerns with vote by mail, is that it seems like ballots are being tossed at a very high rate for things like signature mismatches. But right now in Florida, it's very close. I mean, you're talking about Rick Scott's up by like 12,000 votes, and so we don't know if Bill Nelson's going to be able to overcome that, but the position that I've had and that others have is let's just count all the votes and see what happens. And the position of the Republicans has been let's shut down the count before we even know what happens while we're ahead, which doesn't seem very democratic.
Yeah, well, it's not, and I think the reason why I appreciate your work so much, and I think our listeners appreciate your work so much, is recognizing that some of this should not be just a battle for who's in charge, but a battle for the people to be in charge, and for us to have a process that can be trusted and make sure that at least we can disagree, but we will have a forum where we can. The part of my so I had a story idea, but I want to reply to your sort of question. I think it does. I think when you have a vote by mail state, it does put a pension on needing vote counters of goodwill, and then it does mean if it's really, really close, then you're going to have a mechanism to really look at those things. But I will also say, in this country, I think, and Ari, I think as you well know, we do not have a vast problem of people voting too much. This is not our problem. No. People are not like, oh, all I want to do is vote. It's a thing that, nobody pays me to do, and I don't know if I get a direct benefit, but I just can't wait to wait in line. It's all I want to do. That we have a problem of not enough people voting, of more people needing access to the ballot. My story idea is, are there looking for examples of people with really well-drawn ballots?